Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Aurélie, a lettering artist from the Gold Coast in Australia. I am passionate about helping other creatives improve their lettering skills and sell their own digital products online. I have many lettering courses and design resources available, so if you're interested, make sure to check out my website. Last month, I posted this video on TikTok and received so many comments asking for a tutorial on how to draw a disco ball in Procreate. So of course I had to make a video. Today I'm going to show you how to draw a sparkly disco ball using Procreate. I will demonstrate different techniques you can use in Procreate to create your shape, as well as how to use different blending modes for your layers to add shadows and highlights and much more. So let's jump straight into it. The first thing we're gonna do is actually find a reference image. So I never draw just from imagination. I always use reference images so I know what shape I'm going to be drawing and I know how to place my colors, how to place my shadows, highlights, etc. My favorite place to find inspiration is Pinterest. So you can just type disco ball in Pinterest and it will give you plenty of images you can use as reference. So this is actually the image that I've used as reference for this particular drawing. I know it doesn't look exactly like that, but you'll see in a minute how I use this image. So I have given you the link as well, but feel free to use any reference image that you want. So as you can see, if we look closer, it's just a simple circle with a grid. So you can see that each square is actually a different color and there's almost an outline, like a lighter outline on each square. So this is something that we're going to try and recreate. All right, so let's jump into Procreate. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new canvas. I have made my canvas 3000 by 3000 pixels. And I'm just going to change the color of the background to a grayish color just for the purpose of this video, so there isn't too much contrast and it's easier to see what I'm doing. Okay, so you should have your square canvas. Any size will work really. Feel free to work at your preferred size. Okay, so let's create a new layer. So you probably have your background layer. You can make it any color. On that new layer, I'm going to create a circle using the monoline brush from the calligraphy brush set. You can make your circle any color you want. I'm going to be using red. So you're just going to draw your circle, hold it, so don't lift your pen off the canvas. Tap with 2 fingers to make it a perfect circle. Release, and you can feel your shape. I'm going to make my circle a little bit smaller. There you go. I'm going to activate the snapping option, magnetism and snapping, just so it's perfectly centered. Now for the fun part, we're going to create the grid first. So we're going to create a clipping mask on top of that red circle. So I'm going to create a new layer, tap on that layer and turn it into a clipping mask. From here, you're going to grab the free brush that I've given you. So make sure you download it in the description. It's the brush called Disco Ball Grid. And I'm going to be using a darker shade. So I'm using a dark brown. Feel free to use any shade darker than your actual circle. I'm just going to slowly color my circle. So you should end up with something that looks like this. So it's looking a bit flat. So what we're going to be doing is use the liquify tool. So if you go and click adjustment, you can click on liquefied, and instead of push, we're going to click on expand. It's actually going to expand the shape in the middle. So let's click on that and see what it does. So you can see that it's moving, but it's not doing exactly what we want it to do. So we need to actually increase the size of the brush. Let's increase it to the max. And there you go. You can see it's expanding and moving the shape, actually making it look like it's wrapping around that circle. I'll let you play with this one. You can decide to make it as big as you want or as small as you want. So the longer you hold, the bigger it's going to be. So I think I'm happy with something like this. Okay, so it's already starting to look like a disco ball. Now we can move on to the next step, which is to add shadows and highlights. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is add a bit of volume by creating some shadow. So I'm going to create a clipping mask again on top of that red circle, just underneath the grid. What we can do as well is rename my layers just to make sure we don't get confused. So I'm going to call this one red circle, and this one is going to be the grid. Okay, so let's create a new layer. It's going to create a clipping mask automatically. And I'm going to grab the soft airbrush from the airbrushing brush set. And I'm still using a darker shade of red. And I'm just going to gently add a shadow on the side. Something like that. Keep it very subtle. It doesn't have to be too big, but you can see I'm only focusing on 1/2 of the circle. Now I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to make my shadow a little bit darker in some random spots. So at this stage, this is when you might need to use your reference image again. What you can do is go into your canvas and activate the reference. And here you'll be able to include an image. So here I've just included the image that I had as a reference. So you can see there is some areas where it's actually quite dark. So I'm going to try and replicate that. So I'm going to create another layer again. I'm going to use the same brush, but I'm gonna make it slightly smaller so I can emphasize some areas and make some areas a little bit darker. So I'm not trying to make this perfect. I want to make it look as organic as possible. All right, so you can see on that reference, some of the little facets on the disco ball are almost entirely black, which is something that we're going to try and replicate. And I think this will really make it look more realistic. So I'm going to create another layer once again. Here you can use any brush to start filling some of the facets. So here it's very simple. All I'm doing is coloring random squares, and I'm trying to make it as random as possible and just pretty much just coloring. Feel free to do as many as you think is the best. You could also use the selection tool to do that, but I always prefer to draw it manually because I always think it's more precise. It's just personal preference, but feel free to do whatever you used to do. Okay, so you should have something that looks like this. I'm just gonna add a bit more of those darker facets and use a slightly lighter red. So if you're using another color, feel free to use another shade of that color. So for example, if you're going with purple, you could use a very dark purple and then gradually making it a lighter color. So using different shades of purple. Again, I've created a new clipping mask and I'm just gonna start drawing a few extra squares. It might be hard to see on the camera, but this is just a lighter shade of red. So I've added a few more. This is what it looks like. Now I think we can start adding some lighter squares. Here I'm going to be using the same red I used on that red circle, so that background color I'm using. And I'm going to create a new clipping mask, but I'm actually going to change the blending mode to add this time. And in this case, I'm going to be using the soft airbrush from the airbrushing set. I'm just gonna be doing the exact same thing, just coloring some of the facets. And you can see it's really looking like it's almost like glowing because we are using the same color as the background. We've just changed the blending mode. Again, feel free to color as many squares as you want using any of your reference image. Great. It's already starting to look like a disco ball. So I think to make it look even better and to make it look like it's glowing even more, what we can do is add a bit of a Gaussian blur to that layer. So that layer where we have the lighter color, we can tap on adjustment, Gaussian blur, and add a bit of a blur. So you can see what it's doing. It's just adding a bit of a glow around your squares, which I think looks really nice. So about 8% should be just good. I think if we look at the reference image, there's some squares that are almost nearly white, which is really making it look like it's sparkling and really, really bright. So I think we need to do that as well. So I'm going to be using a beige color. I'm not going to be using full white, but I think a beige color will look really nice. I have this color here in my color palette, which is like a creamy yellow, and I'm going to create a new clipping mask again and change the blending mode to add. I'm going to do exactly the same thing as we did before and color some of the square with that beige color. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect because we're going to add another Gaussian blur on it, but try to be as precise as you can. All right, so let's add a bit of a Gaussian blur. So I'm going to click on Adjustment, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to be adding probably the same amount, maybe 10% for this one. You can see it's creating this nice glow around it. Okay, so if we look closely, we can see this almost like a white stroke around each of those little squares. So we're going to add a bit of dimension to that grid that we just created because it looks a bit flat at the moment. So what we can do, it's very simple, is just duplicate our grid. So our grid layer, you're just going to slide it to the left and hit duplicate. And then we're going to change its color to a lighter color. So if you have a cream color or even white. So at the moment, this is the layer below that grid that is white. So you cannot really see it. So what we're going to do is just slide it to the left or the right, however you want, but you're just going to slide it just a little bit. So you can see it's creating the illusion of a stroke and it's giving a bit more dimension to that disco ball. So I think it's a little bit too much in that case, but I just wanted to show you guys. So I'm just going to turn off the snapping option so I can really have more control over it. And I think when I did it, I went on this angle, so top right corner or something like that, but I kept it very subtle so you can barely see it, but it is there. I've also added a bit of Gaussian blur to that layer. I think it just makes it look more subtle and more realistic. And again, you can change the blending mode of that layer to add. And this is what it will look like at the end. Okay, so I think this disco ball is looking a bit dark. It needs to be glowing a bit more. So we're going to be adding a new layer on top of everything else. So on top of all of these layers that we've created so far. And I'm going to change the blending mode to add, and I'm going to be using the red color, so the main color that I have on my circle, and I'm going to be using the soft airbrush once again. Feel free to use any brush you want. You could use a textured brush in this as well, that would work, but all I'm going to be doing here is add a bit of a glow around the edges like that, so you can see what it's doing, and I let you play with this however you want. Use your reference image and you can just place it in different spots. As always, the more random it is, the more organic it will look, and I think it always looks less digital when you make it a bit more random. So hopefully you guys can see it makes a big difference having that glowing effect. Okay, so what we can do as well is add a glow behind that disco ball. The easiest way to do that, I reckon, is to just duplicate that red circle that we made at the very beginning and use a Gaussian blur. If you go back to your red circle, you're going to duplicate it, tap on it, go into your Gaussian blur, and here we're just going to blur that circle, and it's going to create a nice glow around it. And again, it's my favorite blending mode, you guys know. I'm going to change the blending mode to add. Okay, so now for my favorite part, we're going to be using a glowing brush to emphasize some of the outlines. For this one, you guys are more than welcome to use the light pen brush from the Luminance brush set, but I'm going to be using my own brush from my Nostalgia toolkit. It is called Highlight. It's very similar, but I've just made a few changes to it and I like it much better. So I'm going to grab the lightest color from my color palette. So if you have a cream, beige or white, you can use that. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of all of my layers. And here I'm going to gently draw an outline on the side of my disco ball. So you can see it's almost creating like a reflection on the side. And I'm not going to go all around the ball. I'm just going to do one side like that. And again, if you hold, it's going to create a perfect arc. So that's quite handy. So you just hold and position it wherever you want. And if you lift your pen, it's giving you the option to edit your arc. And here you can move your nodes wherever you want. I have just gone on this side and I'm going to go on this side as well. I don't think it's necessary to go around all of the edges, but you guys are more than welcome to experiment and play with it. There is no right or wrong. This is just one technique, my technique, and you're more than welcome to adjust it and do whatever you think. Great. So the next thing I did was to add more highlights using that same brush. So I'm going to create a new layer. And what I did was to just go over some of the facets like that, some of the sides, and just add a few extra strokes just to make it look more sparkly, I guess, more shiny. So if you look at the reference image, you can see that some of those squares, they have like a little white stroke on them. So this is what I've tried to do. It's not exactly the same, like I improvised, of course, but it's always good to have a reference. And I just went and did all of the facets. Okay, and this is what it looked like at the end. So you can see I went just on some of the sides of the squares, just to add a few touches of light. Okay, so I think we can close our reference image for now. So it's looking pretty good, but I think it's missing some sparkles. So to create the sparkles, I have used my flare brush from my Nostalgia lettering toolkit, but you guys, if you don't have that toolkit, you could use the flare brush from the Luminance brush set. It will do the same job. But the one I made from my Nostalgia lettering toolkit is actually my favorite at the moment. So you could use the white or the beige color, but we could use red as well. I think it would look nice. Let's see how it looks. So let's create a new layer on top of everything else and change the blending mode to add as well. Let's have a look. Yes. So I'm gonna zoom in so you guys can see. I'm using red. I'm using the flare brush from my Nostalgia lettering toolkit, and I'm working on a new layer with a blending mode set to add. And this is what it looks like. So if you tap multiple times, it's just gonna increase the light as well. Here guys, you're more than welcome to add as many sparkles as you want. There is no limit. It is a disco ball after all. You can really go crazy. Again, I recommend using varied sizes and make it more organic, I guess. So this is what mine looks like. There's one last thing I added, and that was just some extra light around those flares. So I created a new layer, changed the blending mode to add, and here I used the soft brush from the airbrushing brush set, and I used the white color or beige, and I just kind of wanted to accentuate those flares like that. So you could go over those lighter facets as well, just to add a bit of an extra glow, because it cannot be too glowing. All right, so this is what my disco ball looks like. Obviously yours might look different. You might have used different colors and it will possibly look different because you've possibly placed your darkest color and lighter color in random places, but hopefully you have something that looks like a disco ball. So I'm going to show you a few last special effects that I've added. I'm going to go quickly over that. So if you add any special effects to your image, I always recommend duplicating it first because you're going to need to flatten your image and merge all of your layers together. So you don't want to be merging your layers and don't have backups. Always make sure you keep a copy. So I'm just going to select all of my layers, including my background layer. I'm going to group those. And I'm going to tap on this group and click flatten. And here you can go ahead and play with some of the adjustments. I always love to add a bit of noise, and I think about 8 to 10% should be good. And it's just going to add a bit of grainy effect to your image, which looks really nice. And then I like to add one of my favorite, you guys, if you've done any tutorial with me before, you know I love that effect. It's the chromatic aberration. And I think it's perfect for disco ball. I've added about 10%. I don't want to go too crazy because it still looks really cool. Like it's a very cool effect, but I think 10% does the job. And that's how you make a disco ball. I hope you found this tutorial helpful in learning how to draw a sparkly disco ball in Procreate. It's always a pleasure sharing my techniques and tips with you guys. So if you enjoyed this video and want to continue learning with me, I invite you to check out my online course Retro Sign Masterclass. In this course, you will learn to create stunning retro signs from scratch, covering everything from the design process to the finished product. You'll also learn how to animate your sign and turn it into a GIF. Make sure to tag me if you try this tutorial, and as always, feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.